Today in Tarkir Dragonstorm, we get a Temur Snapcaster Mage, a spicy equipment, some super cool dragons, and so much more. Let's break it down. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffronolive, and it's time for another daily dose of Tarkir Dragonstorm spoilers. So we've reached day 2 of week 2 of spoiler season, and we still have some super cool stuff to talk about, which means we should probably jump right into it, start talking spicy new Tarkir Dragonstorm cards. Before we do, 2 quick reminders. First, to keep up on all the latest previews throughout the day, you should head over to MTGPreviews.com. Second, if you need any of these cards, you can snag them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Anyway, let's talk some Tarkir Dragonstorm. First up today, we get a spicy new Temur rare in Songcrafter Mage. So Songcrafter Mage, 3-mana Temur Human Bard with Flash. It says when it enters, target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard keeps Harmonized until end of turn. Its Harmonized cost is equal to its mana cost. So if Songcrafter Mage looks a little familiar, that's because it's essentially Temur Snapcaster Mage. You do almost the same exact thing as Snapcaster Mage. You flash this in, then it lets you cast a spell from your graveyard. The twist here is Songcrafter Mage, you're paying way more up front, right? It's not only one more actual mana, but it's also in 3 colors, making it harder to play. So it's going to be more expensive than Snapcaster in a vacuum, but which one is better really depends on the type of spell that you're trying to flash back. So if you play it like a traditional Snapcaster Mage, where you're looking to flash back mostly cheap spells, or if you're looking to flash back spells that have multiple colored pips, like Counterspell or Cryptic Command, Snapcaster Mage is just way better, right? If you want to flash back a Lightning Bolt, you can do it with Snapcaster for 3 total mana. With Songcrafter Mage, it's 4 total mana, and you got to be in 3 colors. Also worth pointing out here, just like Snapcaster Mage, with the card that you're looking to harmonize or flash back from the graveyard with Songcrafter Mage, you do have to abide by timing restrictions. So if you flash in Songcrafter Mage, you can't just cast a sorcery during your opponent's turn. If you want to flash back or harmonize a sorcery, you got to play Songcrafter Mage during your turn, just like Snapcaster Mage. So in just a vacuum, in some sort of control deck or cheap spell deck, Snapcaster seems way better, but there's going to be scenarios where Songcrafter Mage is way stronger than Snapcaster Mage. I think the best example of this is probably Collected Company. So think about playing a Collected Company and hating a Snapcaster Mage. You pay 4 for Collected Company, you hit the Snapcaster Mage, you're like, all right, I want to flash back Collected Company. So you target the Collected Company, you gotta pay 4 more mana to flash it back, 8 total mana for double Collected Company. Then think of Songcrafter Mage. Let's say you hit a Songcrafter Mage off Collected Company. You spend 4 for the first Collected Company, you hit the Songcrafter Mage, you harmonize the Collected Company, you can tap the Songcrafter Mage to reduce the cost of Collected Company by 3, so you can cast the second one for a single mana. So for 5 total mana, you get 2 Collected Companies. So I think that's really what you're looking for with Songcrafter Mage. The sweet spot for this card is going to probably be 3 and 4 mana instants and sorceries. They have 1 colored pip. So in standard, really good with stock up. You can tap the Songcrafter Mage to flash it back or harmonize it for 1 mana. Or Mystical Teachings, Etherize, Map the Frontier, Hide in Plain Sight. With these cards, you get max value out of being able to tap the Songcrafter Mage to reduce the cost of the spell you're flashing back with Harmonize. So I think that's really what you're looking for with this card. There's also some mechanics that it works really well with. So Spree, for example, often adds colorless mana to the spell to let you get more value out of it. So Phantom Interference, Smuggler, Surprise, 3 steps ahead, they all work really well with Songcrafter Mage, because worst case you tap it to just add another spree ability to it. Same with Kicker, like a Burst Lightning. You can tap the Songcrafter Mage to reduce the Kicker cost to get its cost down from the graveyard much cheaper. So those are the kind of synergies to keep in mind. Also super cute with X spells like Genesis Wave, Finale, Devastation, Fireball. Worst case, you always just tap the Songcrafter to reduce X by 3 to get it a little bit more powerful. The downside of this card, outside of being 3 colors and a little bit more expensive than Snapcaster, is if you're trying to do the Songcrafter flash something back thing, like the Collected Company trick we're talking about, there is a window where Songcrafter is going to put a trigger on the stack where your opponent can kill the Songcrafter in response, and you won't be able to tap it to reduce the cost of the spell with Harmonize. So keep that in mind. If your plan is to flash back that Collected Company and it gets cut down or get lost or shocked or swords or whatever, it's going to kind of mess up your plan if you don't have another creature on the battlefield outside of standard. And I think this is mostly a standard card or a commander card in Spellslinger decks. Outside of standard, I think Snapcaster is just better. Pretty much outside of the Collected Company trick. If you're trying to do a Temur Collected Company deck, I think this card is legitimately insane in it. But if you're just trying to do value-y Snapcaster things, I think you're probably sticking to the original. So Songcrafter Mage, super cool to see a Snapcaster style card back in standard. It seems like it can be really powerful in the right deck if you build around it. Plus in standard, I mean, having a more expensive Snapcaster, probably not that bad. Even if you're just flashing back a shock for 4 total mana, you're probably kind of okay with that because we don't have access to actual Snapcaster Mage. So I think this card seems like a really good standard card. It seems like a fun commander card in Spellslinger decks, big spell style decks, and could even show up in older formats in the Collected Company shell. We also got a new equipment in Dragonfire Blade. So Dragonfire Blade, 1 mana equipment. It gives equipped creature +2/+2 and hexproof from monocolored. It has equip of 4, but it costs 1 less to activate for each color of the creature it targets. So if you're trying to equip this to a 4 or 5 mana creature, it's literally free. If you're trying to attach it to a 1 mana creature, it's going to be at least 3 mana. So Dragonfire Blade, when I first read this, I was like, this actually seems kind of sweet. It's cheap to cast. We got a lot of big multicolored creatures. You essentially get Niv Mizzet Supreme's protection. I know Niv Mizzet Supreme hasn't really taken off as a standard card, but still, if you look at the removal in standard, a lot of it is going to be fizzled by Dragonfire Blade. There's a lot of monocolored removal. Plus, we're moving into a format with a lot of 3-color cards. So if you're putting this on a Songcrafter Mage or a Narrative or a Bator, this actually equips for just 1 mana, which seems kind of powerful. So when I first read this, I was like, wait, is this actually a really good equipment? This actually seems like it could be pretty powerful. It fizzles almost all the most popular removal, right? Torch the tower, get lost, destroy evil, go for the throat. Once you put this on your creature as protection, essentially, from all this stuff, hexproof from all this stuff, which is going to make it really hard to kill. And then I remembered, wait, there's one reason why this card actually probably sucks, which is Nowhere to Run. Nowhere to Run just gets rid of hexproof, and that means that Dragonfire Blade all of a sudden is just +2/+2. And if this is just giving +2/+2, it's actually really bad. And I saw some people say, well, it's kind of fine, right? Because you get the +2/+2 buff on Dragonfire Blade. Nowhere to Run's probably not going to kill what's equipping it, but that's not the problem. The problem isn't that Nowhere to Run is literally going to kill your Niv Mizzet Supreme. The problem is Nowhere to Run's going to kill one of your other creatures, and then the Go for the Throw, or whatever removal spell, can suddenly target whatever is wearing Dragonfire Blade for the rest of the game. So because Nowhere to Run is so popular in standard, this went from a card I was actually kind of excited about to a card that I think is probably at best very fringe. Like, if you're not up against Nowhere to Run and you know you can dodge this card and you're playing a deck that has a lot of 3, 4, 5 color creatures, then I actually could see this being pretty realistic. I mean, it's only a single mana, but because Nowhere to Run is so prevalent and in the most played deck in the format and one of the most played spells in the format, it seems like it's going to be hard to make this card work. Also worth mentioning, if this card did somehow take off, there's plenty of multicolor removal that you could play, and we're getting even more of that in Tarkir Dragonstorm. So you could just start running more Assassin's Trophies, Maelstrom Pulses, Awaken the Honored Dead, Inevitable Defeats. So I think if this card did become a big part of the meta, we have the counterplay to kind of take care of that. In Commander, I actually think this card is not as good as it looks. So at first in Commander, I was like, okay, this actually seems pretty good. No one plays Nowhere to Run in Commander. I can play this, stick this on my 4 or 5 color Commander, essentially give it hexproof or protection from pretty much all the most important spells. But the issue I see in Commander is we already have Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots, which essentially does what Dragonfire Blade does, but in a better way for the most part. It just gives literal hexproof or literal shout, and it's going to equip for cheaper. So I feel like because these 2 cards exist, and they're really not that expensive, I guess if you're at the point of your budget deck building where like a $5 Lightning Greaves is too much for the budget, or whatever, $2 Swiftfoot Boots is too much for the budget, if you're trying to go ultra budget, maybe this is an ultra budget replacement for these cards. But I think in a vacuum, I'd probably just rather play these cards. And honestly, these are cards, only some decks want them. I usually play one of them, unless I'm Voltron or some really specific reason to load load up on a bunch of equipment. So I think the Dragonfire Blade, why it's fine, mostly is just worse than the other options. That said, there are a couple of reasons it's interesting. It's 1 mana, so you can snag it with Urza Saga if you're an Urza Saga deck. It also means you can snag it with Trinket Mage, which you can't do with the other similar equipment. So if you're playing these cards, then I could see Dragonfire Blade, especially if you're like a 3 to 5 color deck. Maybe being in the conversation is like a weird budget but tutorable version of a Lightning Greaves or a Swiftfoot Boots. If you're going to play it at all, I think it's probably going to be with commanders that are lots of colors. Like, if you're playing Joda, or if you're playing the First Sliver, you're playing the Reaper King, and you just are 5 colors, and you really want to make sure that your commander lives, I could see playing this as a backup to Swiftfoot Boots and Lightning Greaves. It's only 1 mana. If you're putting on a 5-color commander, it's literally free to equip, which actually seems fine, even if it's maybe not quite as good as the other options in a vacuum. So Dragonfire Blade, unfortunately nowhere to run, I think means that this card is mostly unplayable in Standard at the moment. And in Commander, it's probably mostly worse than Swiftfoot Boots and Lightning Greaves, but in the right deck, one of those 5-color decks that really wants to stick its commander, then I could see it being a nice backup option at least. Next up, we get a spicy new mono black Omen Dragon in Scavenger Regent. So Scavenger Regent, the dragon side, 4 mana 4/4 flying with Ward of discard a card. The Omen side, double black in X for Exude Toxin to give each non-dragon creature -X until end of turn, and then of course it shuffles into your library so you could find it again in the future. So Scavenger Regent, this card seems kind of fine. If you think about what it is, it's kind of like a Meathook Massacre, or actually maybe more like a Black Sun Zenith. The rate is similar to Meathook Massacre, but it's important to keep in mind that Meathook Massacre, a big part of the card's power was its static abilities. It sits out on the battlefield, gains you a bunch of life, drains your opponent out of the game. Scavenger Regent, not exactly going to do that, so it's probably more of a Black Sun Zenith, and the twist there is Black Sun Zenith was -1/-1 counters, but even shuffled back into your library. And then the dragon side, 4 mana 4/4 flyer with the same ward as Graveyard Trespasser. Not bad. We saw the Graveyard Trespasser ward actually be very powerful because it kind of guarantees a 2-for-1. If your opponent has to kill it with targeted removal, they're at least going to have to discard a card. So I think when you add all this together, this seems like a pretty flexible card. I think if you're going to play this card, it's definitely going to be at its best in some sort of dragon deck. Just double black and X to sweep the board is kind of overcosted to some extent. It's not horrible, but it's also not especially efficient. Definitely when you think about how aggressive the aggro decks are in this Standard, I'm a little worried that Exude Toxin might not even be fast enough. But in a dragon deck, maybe you're playing Shivan Devastators, Clarion Conquerors, Bonar Dracosaurs, Magmatic Hellkites, all the new dragons that we're getting from Tarkir Dragonstorm itself, then this becomes a one-sided board wipe. And when this is kill all of your stuff, but keep all my stuff, then the Omen mode on this card is actually incredibly powerful. As I mentioned before, my biggest concern is aggro decks are so fast these days and grow their creatures so quickly. I'm not actually sure that Exude Toxin is fast enough to save you against aggro. Like, if you think about it, to give everything -2/-2, you need 4 mana. To give everything -3/-3, you need 5 mana. Even like Brotherhood End is sometimes not fast enough, and that's just 3 damage to everything for 3 mana. So I'm afraid that maybe it doesn't scale fast enough to make this card great against aggro. Although, in the late game, it can be a hard sweeper, and it does come attached to a pretty reasonable body, which is a nice upside. As far as Commander is concerned, it kind of reminds me of Crux of Fate. I think it's worse than Crux of Fate overall, but in Commander, if you're playing dragons, you're probably ramping a bunch because dragons are really expensive, and if you're willing to dump all your mana into this, this can be a very expensive but one-sided sweeper, where you keep all your dragons, you wrath away all your opponent's stuff, which I think is enough to make me want to play this card in most dragon decks that are going to have black mana in them. So Dragon, Rivaz of the Cost, Savitri Dragon Master. If I'm a black-based dragon deck, and most of my creatures are dragons, I think this card's just good enough. Its body is fine, if unexciting. Its sweeper mode is also fine, if unexciting. But when you mash those two modes together, a relatively on-curve body with a little protection you put on the battlefield, with a sort of slow but still powerful sweeper, I think that's enough to make the card good. So Scavenger Regent seems very flexible. I expect that if there's a dragon deck, this can see Standard play. And honestly, we've been focusing a lot on the sweeper mode, and I don't want to understate the power power of a 4/4 flyer with Ward of Discard a card. This isn't like a Shieldred that's a format-defining card, but that Ward does make Scavenger Regent way better than it looks at first glance. So I think this is a fine dragon for standard, and probably a staple in Black Dragon decks thanks to the Omen mode. We also got a new Abzan Saga and Revival of the Ancestors. So 4 mana in the Abzan colors. Lower counter number 1, create 3 1/1 white spirit creature tokens. Lower counter number 2, distribute 3 +1/+1 counters among 1, 2, or 3 target creatures you control. And then creatures you control gain trample and lifelink until undeterred. So when I first saw this card, I thought it might actually be pretty good, because I keep forgetting that the spirits in this set don't have flying. When I say 1/1 white spirit, I just assume they have flying because of most Magic sets. When we get those tokens, they do have flying, but these do not have flying, and I think that means this card is kind of medium. If you think about what you get out of this card, essentially it's a hop to it for 1 more mana, and hop to it has seen a little play in like rabbit decks, but it hasn't really been a staple level card in standard. Plus, you could argue that rabbits are a better creature type in standard than spirits, since there's actually rabbit synergies. And then you get, I guess, Defend the Celestis at sorcery speed. In the last mode, it's like all your creatures are kind of wearing a shadow sphere for the turn. I think the problem with this is it's just a little bit too slow. It is like grindy value where you get 3 1/1s, the next turn you put a counter on each of them, the next turn you can attack and gain some life with them, which I guess is fine, but it just seems very slow. Like I said before, if the creatures had flying, the spirits had flying, then I think this would be potentially a legit card. But without flying, I don't know, if there's like an Abzan token deck with Mondrak or Elspeth Stormslayer, then maybe it's worth it. If you're doubling up the number of tokens off this, then that's actually a lot of spirits for its mana cost. In Commander, I think it's maybe a Saga card, and even there, if I'm playing Tom Bombadil or Narcy Fablesinger, which is like literally the Abzan Saga Commander, I might play it. Like, I don't know. That's a sign that the card doesn't seem super strong, that like you have the perfect commander on its theme and it's the right card type for the theme, and you're like, I don't know. I guess I could play it in Narcy. I don't think it'd be horrible, but it doesn't really excite me that much in Commander either. So Revival of the Ancestors, and maybe this is just my bias, because I love me some Abzan ever since Siege Rhino. I kind of feel like this card could have been 3 mana. I think, considering what Hop to It does and the rest of the cards we compared it to, I think this would have been maybe fringe playable at 3 mana. You gotta remember it's in 3 colors, so there is a big cost to just having all 3 colors in your deck. So I kind of feel like this one is just a little bit too safe. Maybe you can play it in a Saga deck in Commander. I mean, you definitely can play it in a Saga deck in Commander if you want to. Will it be good in that deck? It'll probably be kind of mid. In Standard, maybe some Abzan token deck takes off, but really, it's probably just a little bit too slow and a little bit too expensive to actually be good. We also got a new green 4-drop in Lasyd Prowler, and that's just a card that, I don't know. At first, I thought it might be kind of good, and then the more I read it, I'm kind of like, this kind of feels like an intro pack rare. So it's a 4-mana 5/5, which is legitimately good stats. That's Yuzum Jin stats, going back to the earliest days of the game. But a 4-mana 5/5, not bad. It says when it enters, you can mill cards equal to the number of lands you control. So if you play this on turn 4, probably going to be a mill 4. If it's in the late game, could be mill 10 or something in a ramp deck. And then renew for 2 mana, you can exile it from your graveyard to put X +1/+1 counters on target creature, where X is the number of land cards in your graveyard. So at first I thought it was lands you control, and that would actually been pretty exciting, right? Where you could take in, play this, mill some cards, have it die, eventually renew it to put like 10 counters on something. But lands in your graveyard is kind of tricky to control. It makes it bad against graveyard hate. I think the biggest issue I have with this card is if I want to play a 4-drop that mills me some cards and gives me extra value, we have multiple options in Standard that I think are probably just better than this. Like, Bristleblood Farmer sees a little bit of play, also a 4-mana 5/5, but you get trample on it. When it enters, you make some food tokens. When it attacks, you can sack food to mill cards and get things back from your graveyard. It seems like it does everything that Prowler does, and then some. Or even Blossoming Tortoise, we've seen this a little bit in the past. Not as big of a body, but it enters, you mill, and you get a land back, so it ramps you right away. So when you consider the other options competing for this slot, I actually think that Prowler is probably just kind of unplayable. The only other thing I want to mention about this card, and this is true of every renew card, not just Prowler, but it's worth keeping in mind because it is a big ding against this mechanic, especially for its competitive playability. All the renews that we've seen, you have to do as a sorcery, and if you're exiling a creature to target another creature at sorcery speed, you do leave yourself very open to get blown out by removal. So if you exile this and you're like, I'm going to put a bunch of counters on something, your opponent can just go for the throat or get lost or cut down in response. So keep that in mind. There is a window where that ability goes on the stack where your opponent can interact with it. I don't think it's a bad card. It seems like, you know, a fine value-y play. I just feel like we already have very similar cards in Standard that do the same thing and mostly just do it better. We also got, and this one's a good one, our Boros Siege and Windcrag Siege. So Windcrag Siege, 3 mana Boros color enchantment. When it enters, you choose Mardu or Jeskai. If you choose Mardu, you essentially get an Ishin. If a creature attacking causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, it triggers an additional time. And then Jeskai, at the beginning of your upkeep, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token. It gains lifelink and haste until end of turn. So when I read this Siege, I think if you're playing the Siege, you're likely playing it for the Mardu mode in some sort of Ishin style deck. And then your second copy, you can put on Jeskai and get a goblin that can attack. I don't know, 3 mana to make a 1/1 goblin every turn just doesn't seem that exciting to me. But 3 mana for an Ishin enchantment and attack a Monocon is actually kind of wild. So it's basically Ishin to Heavens is one, mixed with, I guess, Goblin Assault might be the closest. The twist here is Goblin Assault made your goblins attack. This one doesn't, so you can play better defense with it. But still, kind of similar to Goblin Assault, making a goblin each turn for free. So what are we doing with this card? And I think it looks like it's built to go in a Mobilize style deck. That was my first thought. So Mobilize gives you a whole bunch of cards that trigger when they attack, like Avenger of the Fallen, Zergo, Voice of Victory, to make these 1/1 warrior tokens. If you have Windcrag Siege out, you essentially double the number of tokens you make, which can get super scary super fast. Like even Zergo, a 3 mana 2/4 that normally makes 2 warriors tapped and attacking when it attacks. If this is making 4 warriors, that is an absurd card. It curves really well with Voice of Victory. Voice of Victory on turn 2, turn 3, Windcrag Siege, attack, make 4 warriors, hit your opponent for a ton of damage. So it seems really good with Mobilize. It's also kind of cute if you want to go Jeskai mode with Caretaker's Talent. That's probably the best use, I think, of making a 1/1 goblin each turn is you have Caretaker's Talent, so you draw off that token. It's kind of what Urbos Forge does, and for now, Urbos Forge mostly just does it better. But remember that Forge is rotating this summer, so post-rotation, maybe there's like a Boros enchantment control deck where you have Caretaker's Talent and Windcrag Siege. There's also just a ton of other cards in Standard that work really well with the Mardu mode. Arabella might be the most exciting of the bunch. Imagine playing a bunch of cheap creatures, Windcrag Siege, Arabella attacks, you double up its Drain Trigger, you might just win the game on the spot. Same with Mishra, can drain your opponent out of the game. Alicia, going to grow twice as fast. Breaches, going to double trigger. Generous Plunder, a ton of damage. So we definitely build some sort of super sweet, maybe Boros, maybe Mardu attack trigger deck, almost like we used to be able to build when Ishin was in Standard. We could also just play it in goblins, I guess. Like, again, with the Jeskai mode, I guess it's fine in a goblin deck, but I'm not really that hyped about the Jeskai mode on this card. In Commander, this card's very interesting. So, on one hand, you can play this card any place that you would play Ishin. So if you have an Ishin deck, play Windcrag Craig. It's going to be great in Ishin as a backup Ishin. In all the decks that would normally play Ishin, like Kalia the Vast, you want to double trigger its attack trigger, you'll play Windcrag Siege, or maybe Caesar, Najila, some of the Assassin's Creed cards. Windcrag Siege seems great in all of those decks. But the most intriguing part about this card is this is going to give an Ishin to colors that didn't have an Ishin effect. Because the biggest downside of Ishin is it's Mardu, right? So you have to be Mardu, 4 color or 5 color to play this card. Windcrag Siege gives us what is essentially an Ishin, but we can play it in straight Boros, and Boros is probably the color that can use an Ishin the most. Think about some of the most popular Boros Commander. A lot of them have attack triggers. Like, for example, Winota. Winota's already busted. It's even a game changer, but when it's double triggering every time you attack, it gets out of hand really quickly. We talked about Arabella in Standard, Othori, Anna Pikel, Aurelia, Nile, Waylith. All of these popular Boros commanders do something when you attack, and when you can do that something twice, it is going to get incredibly wild. So I think that Windcrag Siege is going to be a staple in like half the Boros decks that exist in Commander, because they just haven't had access to this effect before, because Ishin was in Mardu. So Windcrag Siege, I love this card. It seems like a fun build around in Standard. In the right deck, I could even see it being competitive. We've seen that in the past, right? The printed original Panharmonicon wasn't quite good enough for competitive play. For a brief moment it was, but it didn't really stick as a competitive card. Eventually they got to the point where they printed Elesh Norn. Elesh Norn, actually kind of a busted Panharmonicon. We might be seeing the same thing with the Isshin effect here, where they printed Isshin. Isshin, as a 3-mana body that died to removal, wasn't quite good enough to be anything more than an against odds card in Standard, but Windcrag Siege is a harder to kill enchantment in only 2 colors, might actually be an Isshin that's competitive playable. So Windcrag Siege, I love the card, I love my Panharmonicons, we're going to be building around it, play it in your Boros Commander decks, play it in Standard, the card is super cool. Next up, we got our Jeskai Mythic from the set, in Jeskai Revelation, and this card kind of feels like Wizards Googled, like, iconic effects for blue and red and white and just stuffed as many of them as possible on this one card. So it's a 7-mana instant. This says return target spell or permanent to its owner's hand. It deals 4 damage to any target. Create 2 1/1 white monk creature tokens with prowess. Draw 2 cards and you gain 4 life. So essentially it's a million for 1. If you can possibly resolve this card, you probably kill something, maybe your opponent if you're lucky. You definitely bounce something, you get 2 1/1s, you draw a couple of cards, and you gain a bunch of life. The only problem with this card is it is a million mana. If you can actually cast it, it's really powerful, although it's also not game-endingly powerful. If you remember, like, Emergent Ultimatum from back in Ikoria Standard, it was a ton of mana, but if you cast it, you literally just won the game on the spot. This is a ton of mana, and it does generate a lot of value, but it doesn't immediately win you the game. So if you think about these effects, the part I'm actually most excited for is the first mode, the return a spell or permanent. It doesn't say non-land permanent, so it's actually a Venser Shaper Savant. You can't blink it like Venser, but still it is 7 mana pseudo land destruction. Bouncing at lands that you can only play 1 each turn is kind of almost as good as killing a land a lot of the times. So you get this Venser mode. You also get to Stoke the Flames. You also get the 2 monk tokens from Rally the Monastery. You also gain 4 life like Helping Hands. You also draw 2 cards like Divination. So this is just like every good blue, white, and red effect stapled together on this one big card. I think easiest comparisons here. Magma Opus, kind of similar to that, although Magma Opus, it actually saw a lot of play in its day. The big difference here, and the reason that Jeskai Revelation I think is way worse than Magma Opus, is you could always discard it to make a treasure. So often you'd like discard the first one, maybe you flash it back with a Torrential Gearhulk, maybe you just use it to ramp into your other stuff. So the fact that you can't discard it early game makes Jeskai Revelation I think worse than Magma Opus. Maybe the best comparison is actually an easier to cast Inspired Ultimatum. Inspired Ultimatum was also 7 mana, except you need a ton of colored mana symbols. In target player gains 5, you deal 5 damage to any target, you draw 5 cards. Jeskai Revelation probably does more stuff, and it's going to be easier to cast. The bad news is, no one really played Inspired Ultimatum, and I'm worried that might be the fate of Jeskai Revelation as well. So if this card is going to work in Standard, where would we play it? So first off, some sort of control shell. If you're playing a control deck with a bunch of stuff at instant speed, I could see playing a copy or 2 with these as one of my finishers, where if you resolve it, like I said, like, it's a ridiculous amount of value. So if you survive to get up to 7 mana and cast this, you buffer your life total, you make blockers, you kill something, you draw a card, you bounce something, it's gonna pull you pretty far ahead if you live that long. So some sort of weird control finisher. It's also super cute with Songcrafter Mage. The color's a little bit awkward, you need green for your Songcrafter Mage, but this is a good spell to flashbacks, and Songcrafter Mage can tap itself to help pay for the cost, so that's another possibility. In older formats, it's also pretty good with Torrential Gearhulk. Torrential Gearhulk just likes big instants because it can cast them for free. So if you have Torrential Gearhulk in your deck, again, still might be worse than Magma Opus, because Magma Opus could put itself in the graveyard. Jeskai Revelation, you gotta find another way to get it in the graveyard, but still a good card to flashback with Torrential Gearhulk. So why am I not super hyped about this card as a competitive card in Standard? And the answer is, I think it's just too slow for the meta. We see 7-drop show up in Standard, but they're typically in green decks that can ramp a lot, and I imagine in our current meta, a lot of decks are going to Hopeless Nightmare it out of your hand. They're going to kill you with mice. They're going to just spell pierce it, and you're going to be really sad that you spent 7 mana and you got spell pierced. So when you add all that together, I think it's probably unlikely that this is a Standard staple. Although, like I said, as a finisher in a control deck, it is pretty sweet. In Commander, I actually don't really like that card that much. I feel like in Commander, It's one of those jack of all trades cards where it does a little bit of everything, but it doesn't do any one thing particularly well. For 7 mana in Commander, I want to be pulling super far ahead. I want to be drawing 7 cards. I want to be killing you. And this is kind of like a whole bunch of little bits of value here and there. So again, if I'm playing some sort of like Torrential Gearhulk style deck, definitely would consider it. But outside of like a big spell style archetype, I feel like Jeskai Revelation, super cool. It does a ton of different things. I'm going to play it in Standard Land Destruction. I think that's going to be super sweet, but I would be surprised if it actually saw a ton of play. We also got a new Abzan legend in Felothar, Dawn of the Abzan. So with 3 mana 3/3 legendary human warrior, it has trample. It says when it enters or attacks, you may sack a non-land permanent. And when you do, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Worth noting here, does not say another non-land permanent. So in theory, you could play this and sack it to itself and just put a counter on everything for 3 mana. But there is a lot of upside on this card. I feel like this card might be a lot better than it's given credit for. So we've seen cards in the past, they can put a +1/+1 counter on everything, rub about Raiders when it attacks, Thalia's Lieutenant, only for humans, but when it enters. But 3 mana to do it when it enters or attacks is actually a very good rate. And I know, you actually got to sacrifice something, so there is a bit of a downside, but I feel like that's going to be relatively easy to work around. So how do we actually take advantage of this? First option, some sort of aristocrat style deck. If you're playing Nesting Bots, Infestation Sages, maybe Bard is another sacrifice outlet, some sort of deck where you're just like going super wide, putting a lot of bodies on the battlefield, having this sack fodder. Felothar seems actually really good. You just play it, you sack something you want to sack anyway, maybe a trigger or some sort of Blood Artist effect or Death Trigger effect, and then you get a counter on everything, and you're going to end up with a 4/4 because it also puts counters on itself, so it's going to grow into a really big threat. Another possibility, just a straight up +1/+1 counter deck, which I feel like I talk about this deck a lot, and it never actually works out in Standard, but the pieces exist with the Ozlith and Botanic Brawler and Stalwart Successor. There's actually a ton of places that you can play this card, a ton of support for this card. The main reason I'm hyped about this card is the fact that it lets you sack a non-land permanent, and we have seen doing things to non-land permanents that normally are things that you do with creatures make cards way more powerful. Think about this self-bounce decks in Standard that are built around Hopeless Nightmare, Nowhere to Run, Momentum Breaker. In a Felothar deck, you can theoretically just replace your removal spell with these cards, the cards that you would see in the self-bounce deck. Use them as removal spells, maybe slightly worse than I go for the throat or whatever, but use them as reasonable removal spells, and then sacrifice them to Felothar to grow your team, to grow your Felothar, which seems very, very strong. So the fact that we have all these removal spells, these discard spells, these interactive spells that are permanent sitting out on the battlefield, I think make Felothar way, way better than it looks at first glance in Standard. So I'm definitely hyped to try to build around this in Standard. I think it could actually be the centerpiece of a very strong Abzan aggro, Abzan counter style deck. It also is kind of cute with the mobilize stuff that we get from Mardu. So like Voice of Victory, Zergo Thunderous Decree. So the trick here is, let's say you have a Voice of Victory and you have a Felothar. You can attack with both of them. You can stack your triggers so you get the mobilize tokens before you sacrifice to Felothar. So then you can sack one of the mobilize tokens that was going to go away anyway to get a permanent +1/+1 counter on all your creatures. So that's another trick to keep in mind, using this with the mobilize stuff. Once you get back to older formats, you can sack all kinds of brutal things. This is a great like Demonic Pact card. If things are going wrong with your Demonic Pact, this lets you get rid of it. Or Treacherous Blessing, Demonic Lore, these really powerful card advantage engines, except you don't want them to sit on the battlefield because they're going to burn you out of the game. Felothar's perfect there. You can play your card draw, get the advantage from them, then sacrifice them to grow your team with Felothar. In Commander, I think this is kind of just like an okay commander. I'm not like super excited about it, but I think there's a couple ways to go with it. So one is it's a cool modular commander. Modular really likes counters on your things, and then when your modular creatures dies, you just move their counters around to your other stuff. Felothar, even though it's not an artifact, seems like kind of the perfect leader for modular because it works on both levels. It puts counters on your stuff, and let's say you get a ton of counters on an Arcbound Crusher or whatever, you can always just sack it to Felothar to dump all of your counters on an Inkmoth Nexus or something scary like that to close out the game. So it seems like a sneaky strong Abzan modular commander, but really this is just a Abzan +1/+1 counter commander. If you're a Gave player, an Anaphens of the Foremost player, a Degathar the Adamant player, Felothar gonna do a lot of the same stuff and have some cool shenanigans thrown in because of those brutal permanents we were talking about, the demonic packs and so forth that work really well with it. So it's kind of a Abzan +1/+1 counters with a twist commander. So Felothar Felothar, I really like this card. I feel like this card could be good in standard in the Abzan permanence on the battlefield, +1/+1 counter aggro style deck, and can do some cool tricks in commander. We also got a mono white 3-drop in Sage of the Skies. So Sage of the Skies, a 3-mana 2/3 human monk. And it says when you cast this spell, if you've cast another spell this turn, copy this spell. So Sage of the Skies, it's essentially Aerial Responder. I guess you lose Vigilance off of it. And Aerial Responder wasn't really a playable card. And this was several years ago in Standard, and it still wasn't a playable card. So why is this a rare? Why are we excited about this card? And the answer is 2 Aerial Responders for the price of 1. Actually seems kind of neat. If you can cast another spell before this, you get 2/2/3 lifelinkers for 3 mana, which is actually a lot of value. Multiple bodies on the battlefield helps you fight through removal. That's a lot of flying lifelinking bodies. So this card, I think the easiest way to play with it is just going to be to play it fairly, where you try to make sure that when you go to cast it, you can cast another cheap spell in the same turn. Maybe a Novice Inspector into Sage on turn 4, get 2 copies, or Nesting Bot, or Llanowar Elves. So shenanigans like that. It's also like kind of sneaky good with Caretaker's Talent, because the copy that you make is going to be a token. So imagine you have a Caretaker's Talent, you Sage this guys, you get the token copy triggers the Caretaker's Talent, and then you can for 1 mana use the Caretaker's Talent, if you haven't leveled it up yet, to copy the token, and then you're going to have 3 Sages of the Skies, which is actually a pretty big flying lifelinking army. So there are some shenanigans just because you get a token copy of the permanent. It also is pretty good with plot. Plot is an easy way that on turn 2 you can like plot a Dust Animus or a Slickshot Show Off or an Aloe Alchemist, and then on turn 3 you unplot your thing and you Sage of the Skies, get 2 copies of it, build this huge, hopefully overwhelming board on turn 3. It also seems designed to work with the Jeskai stuff. Jeskai is kind of the spell slinger clan, as we're seeing in Tarkir Dragonstorm. So if you're playing a bunch of ops and tie guns and just cheap spells to try to do your Jeskai stuff, Sage of the Skies fits right in there as well. So Sage of the Skies, I don't think I would ever play this card in Commander, but in Standard, it seems like it could be a reasonable option. We'll have to see, is 2/2/3 lifelinking flyers for 3 mana on turn 4 or on turn 5, is that actually enough? I hope so. I think so, but we'll have to wait and see. But it's a super cool design, and we haven't really seen a card that works just like this before. We also got our rare Mardu Saga in Thunder of Unity. So Thunder of Unity, 3 mana in the Mardu colors. It's an enchantment. Lore counter number 1, you draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. Lore counters 2 and 3, whenever a creature you control enters this turn, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. So this card I have found incredibly hard to evaluate. So on one hand, if you think about the effects, it's essentially a Sign in Blood, a draw 2 and lose 2, but for 3 mana, which is 1 more than you really want to pay. And then you get like this Blood Artisty Impact Tremors, this super Impact Tremors that also gains you life, but only for a couple of turns. So I could see this being very powerful. Like, drawing 2 cards is fine. Impact Tremors, a very solid card. My concern is the timing's kind of tricky. Like, if you run this out on turn 3 to draw cards, which is when you'd want to run it out, are you going to be able to make enough creatures on turns 4 and turns 5 before Thunder of Unity goes away to get value out of those lore counters? It's kind of an Impact Tremors, but it's only going to stick around for 2 turns on Impact Tremors mode, which makes me a little bit nervous. So where could this card be good? And the most obvious home is definitely in the Mardu deck, and I mean, that's what this card's designed for. But the Mobilize mechanic allows Mardu to repeatedly make a whole bunch of tokens every single turn. So if you're playing a bunch of Mobilize card, then you don't have to really worry too much about those 2nd and 3rd lore counters. You're just going to trust that you're going to have some random Mobilize stuff that's going to attack and make Mobilize tokens, and they're going to drain your opponent with the 2nd and 3rd lore counters. So it does seem super cute in Mardu in specific. It also could be a good token card, like you wait until you get to the 2nd lore counter and Song of Tanzan or Form a Posse. You also got stuff like Anam Pakel that can make lots of tokens. So there are ways that you can build around this, and if you think about it, it's only 3 mana, and it draws you 2 cards and loses you 2 life. So considering that you already have that as the baseline, as the floor of the card, how much damage do you have to deal with this for it to be worth it? If you deal 5 and gain 5, is that good enough? If you deal 10 and gain 10, like, you probably don't have to literally win the game with this card for it to be worth it, because really you're just paying like a slight tax on a Sign in Blood, and then you're getting all the Impact Tremor stuff as a bonus. So in a deck that can make a bunch of tokens, it does seem like it could be pretty powerful. It could also be a cute finisher and Raise the Past. And again, here, I'm nervous about getting the timing right, because the Raise the Past style decks, you don't have repeatable creatures entering every single turn. Instead, you're kind of playing the fair game plan, sacking your stuff, and trying to set up this win the game Raise the Past reanimation turn. If you can Raise the Past on the turn that you hit the second or third lore counter, you probably just win the game. You get back all these creatures, your opponent's going to take a ridiculous amount of damage, but there's also going to be games when you're not really set up to Raise the Past on time. You need to cast Thunder, you don't need to draw those cards, but you don't find the Raise the Past in time to be able to play it when you hit the second or third lore counter, and it's going to do nothing. So the consistency might be a bit of an issue. In Commander, I think the story is basically the same, except in some ways it gets a little bit worse. So first off, Thunder of Unity, it's a 3-color card, so that automatically is going to reduce the number of decks you can play it in, because it's got to be Mardu or 4-color or 5-color. The other challenge for Thunder of Unity is a 3-mana draw 2 at sorcery speed, not very good. I really want 3-mana draw 3s in Commander if I can get them. And then those last 2 lore counters, in Commander, you could just play Impact Tremors, you could play a Perforos, you could play an effect that's similar without gaining you life, but an effect that's going to sit out for the entire game, and you're not going to worry so much about getting the timing right on the card. So I think I would play this in very specific decks. So where would I play this? And it's really with commanders that can make tokens every turn. So for example, both of the Zergos from Tarkir Dragonstorm work really well with this. You're making the mobilized tokens every turn. Also seems really good with like Caesar Legion's Empire from the Fallout decks, where that's another commander that every turn can be making tokens. I can even see playing it in Edgar Markov, where you're making tokens as you cast your vampire spells thanks to Eminence, and then you just play Thunder of Unity, you draw a couple cards, and trust that you're going to deal what? 5-6 damage over the course of the game. Also worth mentioning, it does scale for Commander. It is each opponent. So if you have 5 or 6 creatures enter, you're actually kind of dealing a lot of damage because all 3 of your opponents are going to lose that amount of life. So I wouldn't play this in most decks, but in a Mardu deck, or if there's a 5-color deck that does this, that has a commander that's just going to be spewing out tokens, then Thunder of Unity actually seems pretty sweet. So Thunder of Unity, let me know what you think about this one. I keep going back and forth whether this is like a really solid card that's going to be like an engine of a deck that's going to be sweet in Standard, or if it's a stone unplayable card because it's 3 mana, and in a world of Manifold Mouse, can you really spend 3 mana at sorcery speed to draw 2 and lose 2 without just dying on the backswing? I'm not really sure. The design's super cool. Let me know what you think about this one. Where do you put it? Is it good? Is it bad? Let me know about that in the comments. Moving into the realm of lower rarity cards, we got a handful that deserve a shout out, starting with Glacial Dragonhunt, which seems like a pretty sweet removal spell for certain decks. So a 2 mana Izzet sorcery. It says draw a card, then you may discard a card. When you discard a non-land card this way, it deals 3 damage to target creature, and you can harmonize it for 6 mana. So why is this 2 mana looting removal spell actually kind of exciting? Well, I think this card is really good in decks that are looking to fill their graveyard. So if you think of Standard, seems great with Monument to Endurance. This is a removal spell that's going to trigger your Monument. Seems good in the Abhorrent Oculus decks. They're already in Jeskai. They're already looking to get cards in the graveyard. This is like almost a Chart of Course that instead of drawing an extra card is going to kill something along the way. So in shells like that where you're actively looking to fill your graveyard, even like the Omniscience Reanimator deck, if they want to go into 3 colors, could easily play this card as another way to pitch their Omniscience. So if you're trying to get cards out of your hand and into the graveyard, this seems like a really solid spell. It kills most important early game creatures and gets a card in the graveyard, and then in the late game, you can always tap a creature to get its cost down on its Harmonize effect. I even think maybe it could show up in Phoenix, in Pioneer. It just does exactly what you want, right? It kills your opponent's early game threat, it gets your Phoenix in the graveyard. So even though it's just an uncommon, I think that Glacial Dragonhunt could be a very playable card in the right decks. We also got an interesting new common Omen Dragon in Stormshriek Feral. So it's Dragonside, a 5 mana 3/3 flying haster with pay 2 to give it +1/+0 until end of turn. So honestly, not a great creature, and that's probably the biggest mark against this card. Its Omen side though, not bad. 2 mana, discard a card. If you do, you draw 2 cards. And we've seen that effect, the Tormenting Voice effect, be playable in the past. The problem is, Wizards really loves this effect. Actually, this card made me realize that that, like, Tormenting Voice with the set mechanic is kind of a thing Wizards does now. Just in our current standard, we have Bitter Reunion, Highway Robbery, Demand Answers, Kickoff Celebration, and Saheeli's Lattice. They all essentially do the same thing. For 2 mana, you discard a card, you get to draw 2 cards. They each have a different upside. So the question for Stormshreak Feral is being an omen that shuffles back into your deck, and theoretically you can eventually draw again and either get a bad dragon or use Flush Out again. Is that enough of an upside to beat out these other options? And the answer is probably you're really going to have to care about dragons. If you have a bunch of dragon synergies or omen synergies, the answer is probably yes. Similar to like Kickoff Celebrations. In a vacuum, when I play Kickoff Celebrations, no. If I really want to start my engines though, then the answer becomes yes, and that's the best version of this effect. So I think that's where Stormshreak Feral lands. Essentially, if you're a dragon deck that wants this effect, then this is probably the right answer for your deck. On the other hand, if you're just playing a generic deck, I'd probably play something like Demand Answers or Bitter Reunion. They have more generic upside than Stormshreak Feral. Of course, we also have some draft chaff that you can check out over at MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Tarkir Dragonstorm spoilers for today. So which cards are you most excited for? Let me know in the comments, and I'll be back tomorrow with even more Tarkir Dragonstorm spoilers. So until then, have an amazing day, everyone, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? We can find yesterday's spoiler video here, or maybe the budget magic, where we played a 0 rare $30 build of Caves in Standard.